Time to light the match for the burning truth with Casey Hendrickson.
And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. It is Friday, right? Please tell me it's Friday. Oh, thank God it's Friday. Thank God. This has been a very, very long week for me. I hope that it hasn't been for all of you. I hope that you're just going to slide right into the weekend and it's going to be a nice, enjoyable time for all of you and your families. We've got a very interesting show for you today. Dinesh D'Souza is going to be joining the program at 4:30. So we're going to be talking with Dinesh D'Souza about his brand new movie, Vindicating Trump. So that's coming up a little bit later on in the program. We also have Kayla Blakesley. She is the host of Fort Wayne's Morning News. She is organizing a relief effort for Hurricane Helene victims, and she's going to be joining us and telling us about that at around 4 o'clock. And we got the jobs numbers, so which we'll get to the jobs numbers, and we'll tell you what, of course, the press isn't telling you, because the press is obviously making this a very good jobs book. It's better than expected, but there's some nuance that, of course, requires some analysis that always gets left out. So we'll talk about that here in just a couple of minutes. I do want to thank R&B Car Company. Locations in South Bend, Warsaw, and Fort Wayne. Go to rbcarcompany.com. Let them know that I sent you. The live stream is up and running on Rumble. That is rumble.com/Casey the host. Hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, share it with all your friends. That would be fantastic. So the jobs report, of course, comes out. Kamala Harris's team says it doesn't get better than this. Well, I mean, it does, but I digress. It's better than what they expected. There's a lot of things that don't get covered in a jobs report. And part of that, and we have to explain this every month when this comes out, and 9 times out of 10, the previous month will get revised downward. This time it got revised upward slightly, but there's always a second revision, so just remember that. The second revision is usually the final one, so we keep an eye on that one as well. But it is atypical from what we have seen, and naturally, the Democrats, as they do every time they get one of these, which is rare, but when they do get them, they love running out there and doing the full court press on how great the economy is. The economy's not great. Sorry, it's just not. It's treading water. There are sectors of the economy that are doing very, very well. By and large, it's not great. And it's really, really bad for a good chunk of the population. So if you look at the jobs numbers, again, first glance, if you pay attention to what they're actually, saying in most of the corporate media, of course, what the politicians are saying, it looks fairly impressive. So you've got a surge in jobs according to both the household and the establishment surveys. Those are two different surveys that they use, which indicates a rebound from recent monthly weaknesses, which the news media did not choose to highlight. And how many times we crack this open? Experts are shocked by the low numbers. They're never shocked because we always expect them to be that way. This is actually a shocking jobs report. Like I said, there's a revision next month, and then there was a second revision. And we will sit down and we'll have that discussion when it happens on exactly how that goes, because it usually goes one way under this administration and very rarely goes this way. Coupled with the drop in the unemployment rate, the upward historical revision suggested that much of the recent labor market weakness may have been transitory. Now, I don't know how it could be transitory if we're talking about something that was a weakness for like 3 years, over 3 years. I don't know how that would be transitory, but they want you to believe right now that everything has changed and everything is going to just improve from here on out. Now, we don't know if that's going to be happening yet. This is just the one good jobs report that they've had. They had a good jobs report a few months back. Remember that one, Morgan? They had a good jobs report a few months back, and they did the full court press just like we're seeing today. And what happened? They revised all of those jobs down. It ended up being a terrible jobs report, and none of the jobs reports up until this one have been bad. So until we get consistency, and the jobs reports are consistently good, we can't trust that they're actually turned around yet. Make sense? I think that's pretty fair. I know that a lot of people want it to be turned around. I want it to be turned around too, by the way. I mean, I want the economy to be good. And We can argue about the other issues. All right, so the economy is good, great. Will the policies of the next person affect that, or will they improve upon that or maintain that? It's everything else that is up for debate. The economy being good is kind of good for everybody. So I want it to be good, but it isn't. The one fly in the ointment was the jump in wage growth, which strongly hinted that inflation is also back. Just as we have been warning for months, this is zero hedge, especially now that oil is once again surging in price. And we will cross that bridge eventually, but not yet. Now, they're already giving you those articles in the news. I think it was, was it NBC today? It might have been NBC. Don't quote me on that. But they're floating the idea that the jobs numbers today in the one jobs report that hasn't been revised, either of the two times that it will get revised, the one jobs report that is positive that we have for the entire year, okay, the one jobs report, should say several years, the one jobs report that we have that is somewhat positive, they're telling you that could mean that we might see a move into higher inflation again. So we're starting to see some of those things like, hey, expect some inflationary stuff to happen because, the jobs are doing great, so we don't need to mess with the inflation stuff anymore. Just pay attention to that, okay? All right, so they continue. Instead, for now, let's focus on the parts of the jobs report which the BLS has traditionally used to mask headline weakness, such as part-time workers used to mask weakness in full-time jobs or foreign-born workers surging at the expense of native-born. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second because every single month we have to go over this again because the news media will not talk about this. By the way, most people in the news media don't even know these numbers. They don't read the report. They get the summary that the BLS puts out. They get that summary from usually the AP wire service, and then they come on and they regurgitate those numbers. But they don't actually open up the report and dive through the report. And you can do that at bls.gov like now. You can go do that. You can go take a look at all of the charts and everything else. They'll put the full report together here soon, but they have the charts that are there. And you can start taking a look at, what sector is doing well? What sector is not doing well? Is the private sector adding jobs or is it the public sector that's adding jobs? What's happening with part-time workers? What's happening with full-time workers? What's happening with native-born American workers? And what's happening with foreign-born workers? And for the past year, here's what we've had. Full-time employment has been falling, meaning less people work full-time jobs now than did last year. Part-time work has been increasing, meaning the people who are losing their full-time jobs are now working part-time jobs, sometimes more than one. The number of people who have been working more than one part-time job have also increased over the past several years. Then you look at native-born American citizens versus foreign-born workers, okay? Some of whom might be, legal, illegal, whatever, but they're not American citizens. American citizens are losing work. Foreign-born workers are gaining it. American citizens are losing full-time jobs to foreign-born workers. That's a reality that is in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data going back for a couple of years now. I'm not making it up. It's at bls.gov. I put it in the daily show prep every month when we do the analysis on this, and you can go look at it yourself. Now, maybe you have some thoughts about that. Maybe you don't care that foreign-born workers are taking full-time jobs from American citizens because maybe you think that they're better quality or better suited for those particular jobs, and as a result, that makes sense for them to have that job. That's fine. There's going to be a lot of people who disagree with you, but the reality is the news media doesn't tell you that. The news media will come out and tell you, hey, the jobs report is really good, but they won't tell you that the jobs report is only good because of part-time. Now, last month's jobs report, when it came out, was weaker than expected, but they still talked up the number of Americans or the number of people who had full-time jobs. What they didn't tell you is that full-time jobs had declined. They didn't go over that data set. Part-time jobs increased. That was the thing that they always leave that out. Now, again, you can have your own ideas about whether or not any of that is relevant or good or bad. It doesn't really matter. That's your opinion and your perspective. There will be others out there that have the opposite. My point is they never tell you, so I have to. So we'll go over some of this data. We'll figure out, all right, is this farm employment, non-farm employment? Is it government jobs? Is it private sector jobs? Is it full-time jobs? Is it part-time jobs? Are these jobs going to American citizens or are they going to foreign-born workers? All of that coming up. You're listening to The Burning Truth. I got a question on the live stream. Casey, if Harris is elected, or selected, I'll say, what kind of odds do you give for shooting to start, i.e. civil war? I think that there's going to be violence no matter who wins. The question is how broad will that violence be? What type of violence? We just talk about riots. We're going to talk about something worse. There's been violence the last 2 times. So, we're already at a point where when somebody wins an election, there's violence. So I fully expect that there's going to be violence. I hope that there isn't. I expect it. I'm hoping that there isn't any weird stuff that happens, guys. I mean, I don't know. I really don't want any of the stuff that's, in the back of my head and a lot of our heads. I don't want any of it to happen. The problem is that nobody has any confidence that it won't. And if the American people do not buy into the results of their elections, it's just a matter of time. And this is not a Trump January 6th thing. And anybody who thinks that you're brand new to this. This has been happening since 2000 consistently. And it happened before 2000. There's always going to be people who just assume that something's going on. But as a political strategy, the Democratic Party has been challenging the results of elections for decades. And Republicans didn't. Republicans now have. And the news media has made it all about Republicans challenging elections and refusing to accept the results of elections without telling you that Democrats have been doing it for decades and at much greater numbers. Even with the Trump-Biden election, Republicans opposed it to a much smaller extent than Democrats opposed Trump being elected against Hillary. And I'm just talking about politicians now, like elected officials in Washington, D.C. So I think we're at a point now where, even heading into the 2016 election, Democrats sent a letter to Michigan concerned about voter fraud and machines being hacked and all of this other stuff. So for a long time, Americans have worried that their elections were vulnerable. And now we're at a point where nobody buys the results of any election. Democrats don't buy the results when a Republican wins. They just assume it's foreign influence and stealing somehow. Republicans aren't buying into it for various reasons. And some of those reasons, by the way, it may even be legitimate. Okay, without just picking a side here, just maybe some of them are legitimate. But we are at a point now where the population as a whole generally views the results of our elections with skepticism. We have got to fix that. The only way to fix that is to make sure that the only people who vote are American citizens. And the only people who vote have ID. And the only ways that you vote are secured and not prone to fraud, which means getting rid of the mail-in ballots unless you're, of course, overseas, deployed, or you have some medical condition that prevents you from leaving your home. Otherwise, we are going to run the risk of this escalating until eventually we hit critical mass, and who knows what that's going to look like. So the jobs report. Instead, for now, let's focus on the parts of the jobs report which the BLS has traditionally used to mask the headline weakness. Part-time workers used to mask weakness in full-time jobs, etc. Okay? While native-born workers actually rebounded from a 5-year low as foreign-born workers dropped from an all-time high. That's pretty good, okay? Part-time workers dropped modestly, full-time workers rose. Native-born workers actually rebounded from a 5-year low. Foreign-born workers dropped from an all-time high. All right? And yet, it didn't take long to find what the BLS did this time to make the jobs appear much stronger than expected. a political imperative for the highly politicized agency tasked with making the Kamala Biden economy appear stronger than it was exactly 1 month ahead of the election. The answer, ironically, was in the number of government workers, which exploded higher and were not only instrumental in pushing the household survey print much higher, but meant the difference between a 4.1% and a 4.5% unemployment rate. Now, what that means in plain, stupid people English, really the only jobs that were created were government jobs. So many government jobs were created in the last jobs report that was released today that it was 0.4% of the unemployment rate. If the government jobs hadn't been created in this last jobs report, the unemployment rate would be 4.5%, not 4.1. In September, the number of government workers was tracked by the household survey. It soared by 785,000 people, folks. We have 22.216 million people working for the government, both seasonally adjusted. This is the biggest monthly surge in government workers in history. While government workers soared by the most on record, private workers rose by just 133,000, a far more believable number, and one which, however, would indicate that the recent labor market malaise will continue. 130,000 jobs being added to the private sector is pretty much what we've been doing. We've been hovering right around that number. That's your typical standard thing. What is odd is that while September traditionally sees a huge jump in not seasonally adjusted government workers as teachers go back to school, the BLS has traditionally smoothed over this jump using seasonal adjustments. Only not this time. Because as the next chart shows, while historically the September adjusted number has been relatively tame regardless of how large or small the unadjusted number was, this time something changed as the unadjusted number of government workers absolutely exploded by a record 1.322 million, leading to a record September increase in adjusted government workers. So the BLS has now been counting seasonally adjusted workers completely different in this jobs report to puff it up. And really, we're talking about the jobs all going to government workers. And part of that is, well, they kind of manipulated the numbers. They didn't lie to you. They just manipulated the numbers and how they count them a little bit. So the jobs report does, in fact, look better than it really is. And yes, it's for government workers, but the private sector is still not doing great. Although it is an improvement over the previous several months. We got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth.
The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. Happy Friday, everybody. Dinesh D'Souza is going to be joining us a little bit later on in the program, about 4:30 or so, talking about his new film, Vindicating Trump. Caleb Blakesley, who is host of the Fort Wayne Morning News from our affiliate station in WoWo in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She is going to be joining us. She is putting together a whole group of supplies and people to go help the victims of the hurricane, and she's going to call and join us, tell us about that effort. A couple of things with the employment stuff that I feel like I just want to address real quick. Since January of this year, and this came up with the debate, and I kind of lost my mind on this because I've gone over this as somebody who was in manufacturing here recently. Manufacturing is really important to this area, and most of you know that I took a side gig for a couple of years there, a little over a year, I guess. Well, about a year and a half at a machine shop. And so a lot of the talking about what was happening in the manufacturing industry would happen with the owners and things like that. So the United States of America has not been doing great with manufacturing under the Biden administration, like at all. It was great under Trump. It was so good under Trump Remember the big knock on it. Obama actually came to Elkhart, Indiana, went to Concord, and said that those manufacturing jobs are gone forever, and that basically this is the new normal, and you need to get used to it. And Donald Trump saying that he's going to bring them back, and Obama made his now famous flub, which is, what's it going to do? Wave a magic wand? Well, he did, because manufacturing jobs came back to the United States in mass and continued to surge throughout his presidency, even through COVID. Then the Biden administration gets in, and we've been losing manufacturing jobs like ever since. Since January of 2024, we have lost 49,000 manufacturing jobs. In the last 2 months alone, folks, 34,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost. Now, you may not care if you're not in manufacturing, and that's okay. But you should understand that. When they say, oh, we brought all these manufacturing jobs, no, you didn't. You know, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz tried to take credit for the manufacturing job surge. There isn't one. We're losing them. And we're losing them in significant numbers. And now Trump has a history of bringing them back. So if you're in the manufacturing industry, this is probably going to be something that you're going to want to pay very, very close attention to. Or if you're reliant upon these types of jobs for your company, if you want them in the U.S. and you don't care about having them from overseas, you've got to pay attention to this. Manufacturing jobs are critical. They're very important. And at this point in time, we're losing them. And the Biden administration has not done anything to help manufacturing in the United States at all. All right. I feel like we should probably address what's been happening with the hurricane. Just hit this a little bit before we have Kayla on around 4 o'clock to talk about her efforts. Because, again, we're dealing with a lot of, well, we'll just call it misinformation. Now, I'm talking about real misinformation. I'm not talking about fake misinformation. I'm talking about, like, you can see people on the ground, people who do this, who go to help people. People like Tim Kennedy, people like the guy that I was talking about yesterday who broke down what it is that, the reasons that FEMA denies food and supplies and things like that. Because it's very, very important that we pay attention to this. And I know that some of you are like, yes, well, they're hiding funds for FEMA camps and all of that stuff. And okay, I guess we'll find out. I don't know. But what we do know is that FEMA has a massive budget. And FEMA's budget has increased every single year. FEMA's disaster relief fund budget has increased every single year. Now, there are supplemental spending packages that come up occasionally when there's a disaster and FEMA needs some kind of an infusion of funds, and that's where Congress kind of steps in. So the latest lie, and it is a lie, the latest one is about how Republicans denied FEMA funding right before the hurricane hit. And Newsweek is one of the main publications pushing this. So they published an article today, full list of Republicans who voted against FEMA funding before Helene hit. That's not relevant to what we're even talking about. Now, you might think it is because it's FEMA, it's funding, and appropriations come from Congress, and then the hurricane hit. Now, keep in mind, we are at a 50-year low in hurricane activity in our Atlantic, okay? So 50-year low, which means while FEMA plans for this stuff, FEMA should actually have extra money. You should budget for the average, right? Morgan, would it make sense to budget for the average? And then if you need more, you ask for a supplemental. Congress steps in, says we have a massive storm that caused some serious damage. We need to give them an influx of cash, and you do that. So if we're at a 50-year low in hurricane activity, the tornado season has been active, but it hasn't been crazy, then why is it that FEMA doesn't have any money? That's what Mayorkas said. Mayorkas said FEMA doesn't have any money. Well, they've spent over $1 billion on illegal immigrants. Guess what? That's over $1 billion that could be helping people with the hurricane right now, and it's gone. Now, some of you might say, well, it's a different fund, Casey. You're right. But why is FEMA doing all of that other stuff? What is FEMA's job? Federal Emergency Management Agency. They are supposed to manage emergencies. That is their job. Their job isn't to run around and help illegal immigrants. Their job isn't to run around and do critical race theory, DEI, and woke nonsense. That's not their job. Their job is to help Americans who are the victims of these disasters. That's it. That's what their job is supposed to be. So last week, this is in the article, last week, Congress approved $20 billion for FEMA's disaster relief fund as part of a stopgap spending bill, which will fund the government through December 20th. But the measure left out billions of dollars in requested supplemental disaster funding. Okay, guess what's not relevant? Not relevant to this at all. Not even close. First of all, FEMA already has their annual budget, which is higher than it was in 2023. FEMA already has their annual disaster relief fund budget, which is higher than it was in 2023. Okay? Or at least the same. And then they just got $20 billion more. The only thing that didn't happen is they weren't given some additional money beyond the $20 billion. But they were given $20 billion. So if you look at it, and you're like some of these idiots on social media, and you're like, oh, Republicans voted against FEMA funding before the hurricane hit, therefore there's no FEMA funding, and that's why FEMA's running out of money, according to Mayorkas. He just said that on TV the other day, just debunked it yesterday. We don't have enough money to survive hurricane season. How come you don't have enough money to survive hurricane season? Where did that come from? Why is it that you don't have enough money to survive hurricane season now, all of a sudden, automatically? What happened there? What's the reasoning behind that? I think that's a pretty good question. Now, Casey, why is that a good question? Well, a couple of reasons. One, we've got a situation here where their budget is bigger than it has ever been. Their disaster relief fund budget is bigger than it's ever been. Relatively normal tornado season. No major earthquakes. Hurricane season is below average. So why is FEMA running out of money when their funds are bigger than they've ever been? And you start looking at people who are on the ground, people like Tim Kennedy and others who are saying, yeah, FEMA's screwing this up. Now we got a whistleblower. A whistleblower is telling Congress that FEMA misappropriated funds and completely botched the response to the hurricane. It was released by Matt Gaetz. Let's see. FEMA employee detailing the massive incompetence and disregard for the people in Appalachia. Now, how did the people of Appalachia vote? Morgan, any idea how people of Appalachia vote? Guess what? Not Democrat. Casey, is that relevant? I honestly don't know. But at this point, considering the history that we've had over the past 15 years or so, yeah, probably. FEMA whistleblowers have come forward alleging that the agency misappropriated funds in the wake of Helene, withheld pre-disaster aid, and that first responders and service members have been waiting in hotels without any deployment orders. My office has been in contact with whistleblowers in numerous emergency management functions at the federal, state, and local levels, and they all point to the same critical mismanagement issues. FEMA has wasted taxpayer funds, misappropriated funds, and left other federal, state, and local responders without any deployment orders on the ground. As reported and further confirmed by my office, hundreds, if not thousands, of service members were deployed by the Department of Defense to North Carolina and have sat idle waiting for FEMA. We have confirmed FEMA employees deployed on the clock awaiting orders in hotels. FEMA pre-disaster aid was withheld and exacerbated the emergency. Now, FEMA has been going out there and telling you, we have 1,200 people on the ground here and there. And then we have the local citizens there going, we haven't seen a single employee. There's nobody from FEMA anywhere. Yesterday, I gave you the long list of people who should probably at least visit some of these disaster zones. They've never gone there. They've never actually seen what's going on. So while FEMA's public relations arm is telling you, we have 1,200 people on the ground in this state or whatever, yes, but they're not doing anything. Asheville's grocery stores were empty yesterday. Where's the supplies? Why are mules being used by private citizens to bring supplies into these disaster areas? If FEMA's got people on the ground who are getting paid, fine, but they're not doing much. Kind of goes back to what I was telling you with the guy yesterday, with who's been doing this for 10 years. FEMA won't let you, unless you bring the right supplies from preferred vendors in there. If they've got a contract with Pepsi, you can't bring Coke. You can't bring Big K. You can't bring any of the other soda brands. If they have a contract with Pepsi, anything you bring to a FEMA area better be a FEMA-approved product. Doesn't make any sense. But there's more to this, too. And I really want you to think about this because I'm going to have a soundbite that I think is going to be critical for this. How is it that FEMA, who has a larger budget now than they've ever had, and has a larger disaster relief fund budget than they ever have, and just got $20 billion a week ago, how is it that FEMA doesn't have enough money? Answer me that. Got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth. Where are our minds? That is such a great question. So Whistleblower is out there telling you that FEMA has misappropriated funds and botched the response to the hurricane. Now, Biden came out the other day and said that now we're going to have Starlink available to the victims out there so they can communicate to the outside world, because many areas that were hit by the hurricane, they still can't communicate with the outside world. Everything is gone. He basically said, I'm the one who did that, which he doesn't have the authority to do that. I mean, that would be a Starlink Elon Musk thing. But something that needs to be pointed out, Elon Musk and Starlink have been battling the federal government and the FCC for several months now because Democrats with the FCC who don't like Elon Musk, because Elon Musk has now made a turn to the right, at least this election cycle, has been helping the other side. And so they've been doing everything they can to go after him. They're messing with his rockets. They're messing with his Starlink system and everything else. And so Elon Musk blasted the FCC for revoking licensing to Starlink as rescue operations have scrambled to get their hands on satellite services, which could have easily been in place if the FCC hadn't made their move. And so Elon Musk posted, goes, had the FCC not illegally revoked the SpaceX Starlink award, it would probably save lives in North Carolina. Lawfare costs lives. And this is something he's been dealing with for years, but the past couple of months has been a major, major battle with the FCC. And they're trying to, the Biden administration is saying, the Biden administration has deployed the Starlink systems. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. It's just bizarre stuff. They're taking credit for stuff that Starlink is doing. So now you have, I want to play you a soundbite. Go ahead and cue my audio, please. I asked you a question before the commercial break. FEMA has the highest annual budget that it's ever had. It has the highest disaster relief fund budget that it's ever had. Tornado season's been normal. Hurricane season's been light. They just got $20 billion in funding a week ago. Why is it that they're saying that FEMA doesn't have any money? Now, Newsweek is trying to blame Republicans, even though it's totally irrelevant. But this is Mayorkas 3 months ago.
FEMA is tremendously prepared. This is what we do. This is what they do. And the key here, Rebecca, is also to make sure that the communities who are potentially impacted are prepared as well. And it's not just hurricanes and wildfires, also extreme heat, which certainly some parts of the United States are already experiencing.
Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas sounding the alarm on FEMA funding right after the devastation of Hurricane Helene. Listen.
We are meeting the immediate needs with the money that we have. We are expecting another hurricane hitting. We do not have the funds. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season.
How? 3 months, Morgan, 3 months ago, he said that we were totally good on hurricane season. We're totally prepared. Everything's fine. We got all the resources we need. So how is it that 3 months ago, hasn't been a bunch of hurricanes since then, how is it that 3 months ago they're totally prepared for hurricane season? The hurricane hits and he's like, we don't have any money. Congress won't give us any money. It's almost like it's partisan politics, right? Almost. Wait till you start hearing about the so-called $750 checks, the minimum amount for the victims there. Wait till you start hearing about that. Kayla Blakesley from Fort Wayne's Morning News is going to join us because she's organizing an effort to help victims of the hurricane. And she's going to join us. And one of the questions I have to ask her is, how are you getting around this FEMA stuff? Because FEMA's denying supplies getting to some victims. We'll talk about all of that coming up. You're listening to Casey Hendrickson not on The Burning Truth, but I guess this is The Burning Truth. It's on 5 radio stations. We'll see you in a minute.
Podcasts by Federated Media.